Oh, so we're talking about really the kind of mindset that produces remarkable people, remarkable companies. That's, we've got a great guest with a great story. If you're watching on camera, you already know who it is, maybe. But this is a great topic, great conversation. How do you shift your mindset? How do you adopt that kind of thing? What is common to really remarkable people? We're getting into all that and more in just a minute. My name is Bill Gallagher, host of the Scaling Up Business Podcast. Our show comes to you every week. And we've done more than 500 shows now on all the things to do with growing and scaling your company. What are the stages that are common to all companies as they scale? How do you move from one to another? We've got monthly workshops, we've got coaching programs, we've got all kinds of things, plus these 500 plus episodes and more at scalingcoach.com. That's where you'll find all that. So go there, check it out, scalingcoach.com. All right, listen, my guest today, we first met actually about 30 years ago through a mutual friend, Jay Levinson, who had a book series called Guerrilla Marketing, and we were doing some kind of project with Houghton Mifflin at the time. And then he had garage.com, and he did all kinds of interesting things along the way. And then about 10 years ago, as I went to be a full-time coach, we shared the stage. He was the opening keynote for a conference in San Francisco, and then I was like the third day speaker about it. But that talk and his talk was the best of this series. But mine actually launched my whole career, and I got huge bookings after that talk. So I've had a lot of good luck being around Guy Kawasaki, and we haven't talked in a long time. But Guy, welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much. You're my good luck charm.
And it turns out we spent some time growing up at the same place. I spent 9 years on Oahu, and we went to different schools, but we both came from the same place. And we both share a love of surfing today. We'll both be out on the water later today in different parts of Northern California. So that's fantastic to have you on and connect again here. Yeah.
Oh, so happy to be here. Even though I seldom accept invitations from Punahou graduates.
Don't hold it against me.
Barack Obama wanted me. I said, Barack, I don't think so. Not yet.
So some other things for people that don't know, that have been living under a rock. Guy was chief evangelist for Apple. He worked with a guy that you may have heard of named Steve Jobs. He worked on a computer called the Macintosh way back once upon a time. He's now evangelist for a company called Canva that also maybe you heard of. So he's done some remarkable things over time, advised and been involved in many companies, written so many books on it. He's been the host of a show, Remarkable People Show now, and interviewed scads, I should know the number, but a bajillion remarkable people in doing that, and learned some things along the way. And so he's got this book out, Think Remarkable, 9 Paths to Transform Your Life and Make a Difference. So welcome to the show, Guy.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes. Glad to be here.
After all these different books and things like that, why write this one? Why is this so important to do? Why did you create the show the way that you did? That.
I got a big advance.
Contractual obligation.
No, listen, so I've had this Remarkable People podcast for 5 years. So now I have, 250 episodes, 5,000 pages of transcripts. And that's just too much for anybody, who really wanted to catch up. And I have had truly remarkable guests, far beyond me, like Jane Goodall, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Steve Wozniak, Angela Duckworth, Margaret Atwood, Stacey Abrams, Ronnie Lott, Christy Yamaguchi, Andrew Zimmern. I could go on and on. And they gave me a lot of information and inspiration. So I wanted to capture that and get it out to the rest of the world.
Yeah, it's really great. And taking these ideas, which are universal, and come through people and then share them in multiple forms and get them from something that's sort of ephemeral and fleeting, like a podcast, and go to a book, which feels more enduring and is a great thing. Talk to us about what is this idea of the growth mindset and how does that relate to the show?
Well, yeah. So first, let me give credit where credit is due. The mother of the growth mindset is Carol Dweck. She's a professor of psychology at Stanford, and she came up with this dichotomy that, you can have two different kinds of mindsets. One is a growth mindset where you believe you can learn new skills and try new things and succeed. And I took up ice hockey at 44. I took up surfing at 60. The fixed mindset would say, I cannot learn this. It's too hard. Or also there's the fixed mindset where I am so good, I cannot improve, right? That's also a kind of fixed mindset. And I noticed after interviewing hundreds of people, that remarkable people who have made a difference, they all have a growth mindset. You don't get to be remarkable if you don't have a growth mindset.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about that more in detail? I was probably about 5 or 6 years old in near Hawaii Kai, and my dad put me on a surfboard, a nice longboard, and shoved me into the thing and said, "Have at it."
Well, I wish my father had done that. I started surfing 55 years later than you did.
Yeah. So how did that go? What was that like? And how has that impacted your life?
I started with paddle surfing, and then I got humiliated into going into prone surfing. And my daughter took it up in a big way. And I have had a family practice of I embrace the hobbies and sports of my kids rather
Yeah.
than vice versa. So when my two sons took up hockey, I took up hockey. When my daughter took up surfing, I took up surfing, and I loved it. And now I gave up hockey to focus only on surfing. In fact, we moved to the coast so that we could be closer to the water. And I'll tell you something, if I had surfed when I was living in Hawaii, when I was a young kid, I would not be where I am today, because I would be a surf bum. I'd be working at Waikiki Beach, and I'd be renting surfboards to tourists. That's what I would be doing right now.
It's a good life, and there's something beautiful about it. I think a lot of times we switch through things. I surfed longboards and shortboards and stuff as a kid, and I started doing this thing called wing surfing here, which has a steep learning curve because it was closer and easier. What do I have close to where I live in the East Bay is we have the Central Bay, and it has wind. And I saw a buddy of mine actually from my business group. He's a CEO of a paddle company, and he started getting into windsurfing. This was 2020, and I'm like, I need a sport because everybody's at home, and I got to get out on the water. and so I started the windsurfing then, and you got surfing, then you got a wing, and then you're riding a foil, and that's a lot of pieces to try to coordinate.
Surfing is hard enough. I cannot handle wind and foil. That's not. One of my sons took up foiling and windsurfing, and he also took up what do you call that thing where you put on a wing and wingsuiting, right? You're like a squirrel, right?
Oh, we did that. I'd love to do
Did.
that.
Yeah,
I'd love
that's
to
where
do
I draw the line in taking up what my kids take up, because when I die and my funeral, I want to look good. I don't want to be all crushed.
I want to still be handsome for the open casket. Yeah, I sort of feel like I'd rather be injuried than atrophied.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, like I'm 70 years old, and if I asked my high school classmates, right, I bet if they play golf once or twice a year, they think, oh, they're active. Otherwise they're just, I don't know what they're doing. They're watching Fox all day and they're cheering on Donald Trump. I surf literally every day.
Literally every day. Oh, wow. Good for you.
Yeah.
I try to go like 3 times a week. And I noticed today that the prone surfing is really hard on my neck and back. Like the hardest paddling takes some muscle, but the craning the neck up is the hardest part for me at this age. And I'm 10 years younger than you, right? I'm 60. So
Well, I I worked for Steve Jobs, and so maybe he beat all the rigidity out of me. So that's why I could still, bend my neck and pop up and stuff.
Talk about that. Talk about, I know you probably get tired of talking about it, but of course you'll be talking about working with Steve Jobs for the rest of your life. So get over it.
Well, the only other choice is I die before him, right?
Yeah, and that didn't happen.
Nope.
Sad. So what was that like? What did you learn? Those
Hey,
stories.
listen, working for Steve Jobs was an honor and a privilege. It was also very scary. Don't get me wrong, but I think to use a sports analogy, it's kind of like if you played for Bobby Knight and, you played for Bobby Knight and people get this impression of all he ever does is, throw chairs at the referees and stuff like that. But
Yeah,
if you played for Bobby Knight, you probably loved Bobby Knight. And Bobby Knight probably made you a better player than you could have been without Bobby Knight. And I think that's the same thing that's true of Steve Jobs. Don't get me wrong. He was intimidating and scary, but I would not give up that experience for anything. I am where I am because of Steve Jobs.
That's a really valuable thing. So do you have any favorite stories of that where he like crushed you on something or?
Well, I could tell you where I came close to being crushed, but I emerged victorious. How's that?
Wait.
So one day I'm in my cubicle and I'm working, and he shows up with this guy I never met, and he asked me what I thought of this piece of software called Mindware. And wait, was it called Mindware? Anyway, he showed up with this guy, and he asked me what I thought of this software product, and I said, it's kind of mediocre. It's drill and practice. 2+2=4, Steve. It doesn't really take advantage of the Macintosh graphics and stuff. So it's not strategic for us. And then he turns to me and turns to the guy and he says, Guy, I want you to meet the CEO of the company. So now, if I had said, oh, it's a great piece of software, Steve probably also thought it was a piece of shit. And if I had said it was great and Steve thought it was a piece of shit, I might have gotten fired right there in real time. So I passed the Steve Jobs test and I lived to fight another day, invest another day.
Yeah. I worked for a guy once who was really remarkable. He was an extraordinary storyteller, inspirational speaker. He was also a very complicated individual, like personally in many ways that I won't share. But so I'm working with this guy, and he had notorious stories and really weird things. But and then like once a year, we'd have to do our annual strategy and plan for each of the market leaders. And I came in and I had my whole thing, and I'm talking, and I'm first up in the day, and I actually have the biggest market segment, and I'm given my show, and I've spent time preparing it. And then he's like in rare form. I don't know if he slept badly or his girlfriend turned down or something, but he just starts lighting into me. He starts swearing at me and humiliating me. You're a fucking problem, Gallagher. And will get edited now, but like, I'll tell you what your fucking problem is. You don't know how to sell anymore. And like, I'm like, oh, and so shocking. And I just like inside, I wanted to cry. I'm like, this is the worst possible thing. I couldn't even imagine. Now I'm in my mid-20s, so I'm not that old. But I am like, I have to get through this. And he cannot see me cry. Like all I feel like is crying. I am not crying. And I'm famous for crying, right? Like on stage to inspire people or whatever. But I'm like, no, not today. You motherfucker, you're not like this is how I felt, like, right, that. And so then I finished the thing, we get through it, and then it went really, really long, and then we take lunch, and now my peers are with me, and they're like, dude, that was odd, we felt bad for you. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't say anything, you didn't interrupt. You didn't run interference for me, you just let me weather that storm, that blast of whatever. Then we come back from lunch, he's like mellow, maybe had a drink at lunch or something, I don't know, but like, and theirs were fine, and they like sailed through.
And now looking back, that probably was a valuable experience, right?
I learned that getting through, surviving things and if I hadn't gotten through, right, I wouldn't have gone on to do one of the most important things, which was grow a business over $550 million before 30. Like, that's a really important experience in my life and changed how I view executives and myself. And there are many lessons in that, but I had to get through that, right? And he did really want it to win. He did.
But yeah, when Steve Jobs spoke at the Stanford graduation, he made a statement that you can only connect the dots looking backwards, right? So at the time of that experience, you probably weren't thinking, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to lead me to create a $550 million business under 30. Thank you for doing this to me. But now you can look back and say, yeah, that really helped me.
Yes. Right. Like from now, I have another friend who had a company that worked with Apple in those days, a company called Spec, Tony Lilios, and he's a dear friend and he coached me and he worked with Steve on some things in I think iPhone, not the Mac days, but the later iPhone times. And he's like, yeah, I watched Steve like just rip into people and things all the time, but you never for 1 second thought that it was like personal. It was about doing your best work. He was pushing for greatness, pushing for something beautiful, elegant, amazing, right?
Yeah, I mean that's why you feared him. On the other hand, you learn from him, and I think I talk about this in my book that there are fundamentally two kinds of assholes. So one asshole is ego driven. It's all about me, myself, and my glorification, right? And the other kind of asshole is a mission driven asshole, and a
Yeah.
mission driven asshole says we're going to make the best freaking personal computer. And if you get in my way, I'm going to run you over. And that's the kind of asshole that Steve Jobs was. So I think that, I'm not advocating you have to be an asshole. And Melanie Perkins, the Canva CEO, proves you don't have to be an asshole. But a mission-driven asshole is a very motivating factor.
I think about this. You've interviewed a lot of remarkable people, and this comes up frequently in the background as I'm coaching CEOs. They're like, yeah, but this person, they'll cherry pick someone, like, oh, but this person had this issue. I'm like, look, Henry Ford was a Nazi. Steve Jobs was maybe not the best dad ever. Like, Elon Musk is a complicated man-child.
I think that's being too kind, but okay.
Maybe too kind, right? Like at one after another, like they're all human beings and they all have like a flaw. You could be great. And sometimes the most extraordinary people are maybe not, they have some issues in some other areas, right?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, I think the most remarkable person alive today is Jane Goodall, and I know her pretty well, and I have yet to find a flaw in Jane Goodall.
Jane Goodall. Okay, so let's all try to be. Actually, my wife's trying to organize a trip with some CEOs to Uganda right now, and we're going to go see some gorillas and things like that. So that would be.
Tell those gorillas I said hi. Actually, I think Jane Goodall is chimps, not gorillas, but that's okay. You mean gorillas, the animal, not gorillas, the terrorists, right?
Right.
Just making sure.
The two spellings are very different.
It would be a real bummer if you get there and the person picks you up and takes you to this like terrorist camp and you said, well, you said you wanted to see gorillas. I'm showing you gorillas. Here's an AK-47. Here's a 30 clip. 30 bullet clip. This is how it works.
Well, when you think about this, the complicated people with issues, I feel like there's like some people want to just discount, like, well, we can't learn from them because they did this bad thing. I'm like, yeah, they did, but they also did something great. Can we learn from the great part and try to be a better leader?
I think that's absolutely true, but I would also make the case that when you come right down to it, almost everybody is complicated. I don't think you can divide the world into complicated and simple people. Everybody's got their complications. You just got to dig deep enough.
Yeah. I feel like when I look in the mirror, I feel pretty good about myself, my life, my work. I'm committed to making a difference for people. I act as a coach. I help people fulfill their vision for a better world. That's my work, and I strive to be very generous with it. And then I try to do that in every. So, like in general, I feel good, right? Like I feel good about how I'll be looked at. And yet,
Yeah.
last week, I had a moment where I got hangry, where I lost my cool, where I went to 11 on the scale, and I just was completely like nuts and out of the window. And I'm like, somebody stopped me. I was out of control, like anger, like I turned into the Hulk for a few minutes, and it had like a real impact on my daughter and my wife.
And you know what? 20 years from now, your daughter's going to say, "Oh, that time my dad just he went off the freaking
Yeah,
scale, but it
yeah,
taught me a valuable lesson and it enabled me to create a $550 billion business."
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Or she's going to say, "My father was an asshole. May he rest in peace."
I'm a good riddance. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's something that like the great people, they're complicated. It's not a simple thing. And yet you can also get reduced down to something like they're just a bully or whatever, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, people are complicated. And I'm not complicated. I'm simple. But yeah,
You're simple.
I'm a simple guy.
Yeah. What are there any particular one? You've had so many remarkable people on. When you think about the mindset, what is the access to shifting your mindset? How do we adopt that? How do we have that be a positive thing? And then how do we have it affect the people around us, our companies, our culture, our teams?
Well, I think about 70 or 80% of a growth mindset is realizing that there is a growth mindset and there is a fixed mindset. You may not even be aware that you have a fixed mindset. But I think when somebody explains the difference and, says to you, "Well, have you tried a new sport? Have you tried reading books outside of your, usual genre? Have you
Mhm.
gone to a conference that is not, right down the middle of your industry? Are you watching different TV? Are you, whatever, right?" At some
Mhm.
point you say, maybe I am in a rut. And that's about, I think, 70 or 80% of it. And then you have to embrace yourself for vulnerability, because when you learn a new sport or you learn a new subject or creating a new industry, you're going to get wounded. I mean, you try surfing at 60, you're going to get hurt. That's just the way it is. And you have to embrace that thought. And I think that's step number 2. And then
Mhm.
you need to surround yourself with people who are supportive, because you can have a growth mindset and be in a fixed mindset environment. And if you work for a company where they don't have training programs, that they don't foster cross fertilization of functionality, and they only want to hire white men from Ivy League colleges, and there's no diversity. I mean,
Mhm.
if you have
Mhm.
a growth mindset, you're gonna not do well in that company. You need to get the hell out of there.
Yeah, it's conformist. It's consistency. Yeah, interesting. Okay, so if I'm the leader of that, what is it that I need to do to bring that to my company?
Well, I think as a leader, the first step is you have to understand that you should hire people who are better than you in their function. And if you're a
Uh-huh.
leader who wants to hire people who are not as good as you in that function because you want to look around the room and feel superior to everybody, you're a freaking loser by definition. So,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I think that is the bulk of it. And as a leader, you should look around the room and say, "Wow, she's better than me in sales. He's better than me in
Yeah,
operations. She's
yeah,
better than me in finance." And everybody should be better than you.
yes. It's interesting because then who does that make you? That makes you like the servant of the team, the servant of the mission of the company. I'm there in service of them to help them to win. I am not. They're not
Yeah.
here to do my bidding.
Well, the irony is that you would think, "Oh, if everybody's better than me, that I'm completely dispensable." But the irony is, I think that if if you hired everybody who was better than you would actually become indispensable because so few people are willing to hire people better than themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like, who could assemble a team of such great people? He's indispensable.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, when I think about hiring, I also think about like I want people who are extraordinary at things that I'm terrible at, who are going to
Right.
be like look, I'm great at like inventing and starting things. I'm great at evangelizing, but I am terrible at like repetition and the consistency
Yeah.
of if you put me in charge of operations, your company
Right.
will fail. If you
Well,
put me in charge of that kumbaya kind of thing where everybody feels good and your company will fail. Like,
well, I mean, if you go back in history, imagine if Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were both engineers, or imagine if Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs were both marketeers. We would not be talking about Apple today, right? Yeah, I mean, you need someone who can make it and somebody who can sell it. You need
yeah.
complementary people, not duplicative people.
Are there any people of your guests, your remarkable people, that really surprised you? You were not expecting it to go that way?
Yeah, you mean positively or negatively?
No, either. The negative would actually make really good stories, but you might not want to.
Well, I got to tell you that, when you interview a MacArthur Fellow or you interview a Nobel Prize winner, because
Yes.
I have had people like that on my podcast.
Yeah.
You're kind of set to expect something pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
But I tell you, some of the most exciting interviews were like I interviewed someone who he was sentenced to 40 years of prison at 16. He got out after 22 years and now he's an artist, right? Or I
Mm,
interviewed someone who was raised in the projects of New York and both parents were crack addicts. I interviewed someone who was homeless and, abused by his mother and stuff. And then I also interviewed a woman who was diagnosed with ALS 10 years ago and still alive, and she decided to complete a marathon in all 50 states. Yeah, most people would not have heard of any of these people. You all heard of Jane Goodall and Steve Wozniak and Angela Duckworth and Margaret
yeah.
Atwood and Stacey Abrams, but you wouldn't have heard of these people. I think those people are, just as remarkable and maybe more interesting because of what they had to overcome. Many remarkable people are remarkable because, things fell into line for them right away. But there are some people who had to if you imagine having to overcome 22 years of prison to become an artist, I mean, that's a big deal, man.
I'm struck by how there are some people who they have a little like weird thing in their tidy suburban upbringing, and then they use it to torch their life and they do something violent in the community or whatever. And then other people who like lived through the Holocaust and then became amazing, beautiful
Yeah.
authors and violinists and things like that. I'm like, it's not necessarily adversity that is the determinant about having something bad happening. It's about what you do with it and how you handle it.
Yeah.
That is more the
You know,
course of it.
this is a this is an interesting topic because I mean this is facetious, but you wouldn't say, oh, in order to be outstanding, I need to go through tragedy, so give me a disease or make me homeless or make me a drug addict,
Yeah.
Andrew
Yeah.
Zimmern had drug problem. I mean, of course
Yeah.
you wouldn't do it that way, but the concept that, oh, you were brought up, you went to all the right schools, Ivy League, you had an internship at Goldman Sachs, you got your first job at McKinsey, and now, you're running a hedge fund. Oh my God, aren't I remarkable? Well, you won't get on my podcast. I don't give a shit. My podcast is about remarkable people, not rich people, not famous people.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that highlight. And I think about a very dear friend I had who he had a really good life. He was very smart, that kind of thing. But it was like a little too easy, I think. And he didn't do the work and he had a drug overdose. And it was ended short. And I think that like lean into the adversity. Like we all have different things that happen to us. And if you keep like leaning to it and striving for something new, I love that thing that you pointed out. Like if you are doing the same thing, then you're not really in a growth mindset. And one of our company values is never finished. And I like this idea that I'll always be working. So I'm always looking for like, what's a new thing I could do? This fall, I'm going to a retreat conference about considering like what's the rest of your life all about with a guy named Chip Conley.
Oh yeah, you're going to Mexico.
Yeah, going to Mexico with Chip. And you know, he has this thing, Modern Elder Academy. We did a show recently with Chip and talked about the work that they do there and that kind of thing. But you know, like let's stop and do that. Just before COVID hit in 2019, I got a coach and I learned how to do stand-up comedy. And then I went and did a 15-minute set in New York, and it was among the most terrifying things that I ever did. I broke my toe that day. I was so like wound up, like crazy about like, oh, I have to memorize this thing and then I have to be funny for, 15 minutes in a club in New York. And
how did it go?
Like when I watched the replay, I'm like, it wasn't that funny. And some of the jokes that I wrote, like with the Bay Area mindset, like didn't go over there. And some of the jokes were only cringy because I wrote them because I knew my kids would be in the audience and I wanted to like make them uncomfortable. But like, look at then the being more free with comedy in my public speaking and my work like came in. I did another thing a little while later called vocal improv. And this is among the most terrifying things I ever did. Like, I'm like, what is that? I don't know. It sounds weird and different. So you're going to go and you're going to make sounds like improv, not words, not singing, musical sounds that are unplanned. And so they're like the instructor is like telling us what to do at the beginning of the class. And she's like, okay, I'm going to start like a little melody and then you're going to add a bass thing. And then you're going to add a little beat and then you're going to add a little color. And then just like, what happens, right? And then she starts this like beautiful sort of scat singing thing. And she's fantastic and trained singing and like that. And then it all sounds amazing. And as it starts to come around the room, I know soon it's going to be my turn to do something. And in that moment with those people, I was like, I would rather take all my clothes off right now and just be naked. That feels safer to me than how uncool I'm about to sound.
I'm sure they preferred that you tried the vocal.
I'm sure they preferred it, but I felt like the vocal thing was going to be more vulnerable and more awkward than just being a naked 60-year-old. So I did it, right? And it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't good. It wasn't pretty. But then over the next, few weeks and then with time, I was freer with my speaking. I used a greater range of tone and things like that. I got like there was a breakthrough of some kind in that. I didn't keep doing that work, but like doing an uncomfortable, sometimes you do a lot more of it, right? You're like hooked on it. You're like, I got to do more of this. I did the wing foil thing. I'm like, I was terrible, but I kept at it, right? I think like all that, like I did the comedy thing. I didn't keep doing it, but then I brought some of it into, my other work, right?
Well, one of the lessons I learned, and I think it was from Andrew Zimmern, that I swear 90% of success is you just got to keep showing up. Because most people do not keep showing up. They can talk a good game, but you just gotta keep showing up, right? So for about 10 years, I've been trying to surf every day. You just gotta keep showing up.
Though there is this fallacy, like, somebody we know said, well, if you just put in 10,000 hours of stuff, I've spent 10,000 hours at things that I'm still terrible at. Like, it doesn't necessarily make you masterful at it to spend 10,000 hours.
Well, I mean, listen, I think what you learn is, in a sense, the journey is the reward, right? It's like at no point, I hope you didn't think you were going to be a professional windsurfer. I don't think I'm going to be a professional surfer. I still might put 10,000 hours into it.
And you might really enjoy it, right? I spent 10 years, I did 45 triathlons and marathons for a while. And I really enjoyed it. It was great. It was like a huge thing. I would spend 13 to 15 hours a week of training in doing it. It was very all consuming for a while in my life. And I never had any danger of being in the podium. I never had any danger of being a top 10 finisher. There was never any chance of that. But I like really enjoyed it. And I lost weight. I got in shape. My self-image is good. My self-esteem is improved. It came to all parts of my life.
So you are a winner. You're on the podium.
Yeah. Right. Like in the greater sense of life. Well,
yeah.
One last thing, before we, as we head towards what is this getting stoked on oaks? Talk about that.
This is a long story. Okay. So where I live, the hill behind my house was covered with eucalyptus trees. And if you're not familiar with the eucalyptus tree, it is a bad tree to have because it has very shallow roots and it grows very tall, so it can fall over and crush your house. It is also a producer of a lot of shedding that is fire material. And the tree itself, the leaves full of oil, it burns really well. You do not want to live close to eucalyptus trees in California during the fire season. So I took the initiative and I had like 150 eucalyptus trees removed from my property. Yeah. And then now my property is kind of looking like, like a desert. So I decide I got to put back native species, and the thing to put back is oaks. So then I learned, like, what's it take to put in an oak tree? And, yes, you can go get a sapling and put it in. But I read that if you start from an acorn, eventually the acorn-led tree will overtake the sapling. I don't know why. I mean, I read it on the internet. It must be true. So anyway, so I said, okay, I'm going to go the acorn route. So then, finding acorns, not that easy when you really want to. When you don't want them, they're everywhere. But then not every oak tree puts out acorns. So I found some great acorn producing oak trees on University Avenue in Los Gatos, California, if you want to follow in my footsteps. It's right outside the Warby Parker store, just FYI. So you get all these hundreds of acorns, you put them in a water, and then the ones that float you throw away because those are dead. The ones that sink are good. You put them in a pan, you cover it with a cloth, you put water on the cloth, you put it in your refrigerator for 2 or 3 months, and then you plant hundreds of them in your field. And then a few dozen pop up. And now you got to like protect those from the deer and everything. And now it's been a year and a half. And of those hundreds that I started with, I think I have 4 saplings.
Wow.
Now, so I learned a very valuable lesson. If I could tell you which 4 seeds would become a sapling, I would have just planted those 4, right? But I had to plant hundreds. And the other thing about getting stoked on oaks is that it leads to a sense of humility, because as I was doing all of this madness, I figured out one day, Guy, you're doing something that it takes 20 years for an oak tree to grow big enough to provide shade. So it's very possible that you will never sit in the shade of the oak tree that you are now planting. You are truly doing this for your kids and your grandkids. Because, I mean, if I went down that hill and sat under the shade of those oak trees, they may never be able to get me back up the hills.
That's interesting. Investing in the future, being willing to do a lot of work to produce a long-term result is a fascinating.
And the result you may not even see.
Yeah. Are you willing to work on that? It's interesting. Years ago, we saw Japanese companies in particular take a very long view on the work that they did versus the quarter by quarter stuff that we saw with American public companies. And that idea, are you willing to work on something who may not even be realized in your lifetime, right? Like you work at something that pays off after you're gone, and that maybe even your contribution to might not be remembered for.
It's
a fascinating noble pursuit. Yeah. Well, if you're like me, you're probably hungry for more stories, more lessons, that kind of thing. The book is Think Remarkable, 9 Paths to Transform Your Life and Make a Difference. And you'll find all that and more at guykawasaki.com, Guy's website, right?
Absolutely.
The links. And then we'll put in we'll put in a link to a free course as well, or an offer for Canva. Tell us about that, Guy.
Yeah, it's a course that Canva and I made about how to be remarkable. So it's a free online course. And the last thing, which I launched this week, is I launched the Substack newsletter. And that Substack newsletter is called Remarkable People. And its goal is to help you be remarkable also. So I got you coming and going.
The free course, the Substack, the podcast, the website, the book, multifaceted. It's inescapable.
Like smog. All right. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for coming on, for reconnecting.
I'm going to go surf right now. All right. Take care.
Take it easy. See you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks again for watching, for listening. Thanks again to the folks at Story On who got our show ready, to my friend and mentor, Vern Harnish, who created the whole Scaling Up framework. You'll find our stuff and more at scalingcoach.com. And until next time, keep scaling.